How are we doing today? Hope you're all doing as well as you can. Hope your lives are going as best as they can in general. And I hope you're finding ways to deal with life in your own ways. In this video, I'm going to talk about a topic that's a bit difficult to talk about, really, because it's very, very personal, and it's kind of a bit of a dark and deep area, to be honest. But I'm going to touch upon it. That's with regards to family. And just before I start here, I don't want any. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not looking. I'm not trying to self-loathe here or anything like that. Or, trying to play the victim or something like that. I just want to wear my own thoughts, and maybe there's people out there that are going through similar things that I've been through and can relate to me on some level. And that's basically all my intentions for this channel, is just to kind of be a beacon of hope for somebody out there that might be struggling and really going through the emotions of malaise in life, the difficulties of growing up, and the existential aspects of maturing. I'm starting to understand, essentially kind of this stage of sort of your mind deconstructing the world around you, rather than your brain idealizing the world as you tend to do when you're younger. My family are a bit of an odd bunch, I have to admit. They're all, their own individuals, their own people. And while, of course, say I love my family and I care about them as best as I can, we are incredibly different people. We are very, very misaligned with a lot of things, and I just never really felt like I never really truly felt like I had much of a family, I think. Even though I have two brothers, one sister, obviously my parents, I had my grandparents when they were alive, and I think really, if I'm being honest with you, my family kind of fell apart the moment my grandparents died, in some ways. I mean, the kind of, my family has always been on a bit of a knife edge. It's never really been particularly stable in many respects. I hate to admit, but I think definitely my grandmother passed away, my grandfather passed away. I think things really did change. I mean, things kind of steadily been getting worse, I think, over the years anyway, leading up to their passings. And I don't know. I just felt I never really felt like I really had much of a family. It's like my family really was my grandparents in many respects. I think it was really my real sense of loyalty, I suppose, in many respects, was with my grandmother, my siblings, really, more than my parents, I suppose. As I know that sounds horrible to say that, and I know that might come across as being really cold and it's not. I had a relationship with my mother and father, of course, but I just never really felt that close to them, I suppose. I never really felt like I was emotionally connected to them on many levels. I always felt like they were very distant parents. I very rarely ever really saw them. I saw my mother get more emotional than my father. Then again, that's to be expected. But like, I never really saw my father ever really get emotional. I never really saw him that often. I mean, I saw him get angry and frustrated and annoyed, and he went through his own stuff. I never really saw much in him. I never really saw much like. He never seemed to really have much of a personality to speak. I never really seemed to have much of anything to really say about anything. I know that sounds really disrespectful, and I don't mean it to be, but just being real with you. And I don't think I ever really truly understood my father. And I suppose if I did have if I had to choose out of my parents which one I had probably a bit more of a connection with, I'd probably have to say my mother. And again, this doesn't fill me with any happiness saying this stuff. It really doesn't. This is not easy stuff to talk about, but just being real, just being completely open with you. Don't get me wrong. I love my father, I love my mother, but I think you just have to be honest about it and about these kind of things in life, and just say, look, not so much favoritism. It's just that I just naturally didn't seem to connect that well with my father for all sorts of reasons. Before all this trouble, I just never really felt like I had much of a relationship with my father. I mean, and the thing is, like, we did, we used to watch stuff together on the TV. We played sports together. We did games and stuff. But I always felt like my father was really distant, really deeply troubled as an individual, and he just never really seemed to be that enthusiastic about a lot of stuff. He always just kind of seemed to like to just want to be in the background all the time. Like, even when we used to play games and stuff in the house, like Christmas or whatever, he never really seemed to be that interested in like joining in. So I don't know. It's just like I never really felt like I never really knew my father. I mean, I know that you see the surface level crap. You see all the day-to-day goings on or whatever. The normal stuff, but like you never really. I never really. I just never really felt like I connected with him. I did try many times. I think really, to be completely honest with you, I think my father really felt like he could open up in some ways. I think when he was on the bottle, I think that's the fucking truth of it. I don't think he ever felt like he could really be honest with me and tell me what he really felt and what he really thought about a lot of things. I think he just felt like he had to keep things to himself rather than, I don't know. I just never really felt that close to my father. That's the truth. And in some ways, I didn't really. I think the best thing to say is I never really had a healthy relationship with either my father or my mother. That's the truth. And maybe even to some extent as well, as much as it pains me to say, I don't think he ever really truly had much of a relationship with my brother beyond a certain age as well. So I expect, of course you can expect that sibling dynamics are going to change as the years go on, as everyone goes through their own issues and their own maturity stages and all that kind of stuff. But I think probably more than anybody else, and sometimes I kind of wish it wasn't the case, but it is. I do have more of a. I think more than anybody else, really, I have more of a. I don't want to say healthy necessarily, but I certainly have more. Well, certainly have more contact with my younger brother than anybody else in the family. That's for sure. Very rarely do anybody else reach out to me. My parents don't use social media regularly. Well, certainly my mother doesn't. Well, that's a whole other story. But my father doesn't regularly use social media as far as I know. Or if he does, he's not. I don't think he's particularly interested in talking to me these days. And I can't blame him, really, if I'm honest. But, communication works. It's a two-way street, isn't it? I just never really felt like my father was present during my childhood, I think, in many ways. I never really felt like he was really that engaged, really that interested in being engaged with us in many ways. Like, he just always seemed to be in his own world. Like, he just always seemed very cold and distant and emotionally unavailable. And kind of the same with my mother, really. It's like, I think the reason I had a bit of a better relationship with my mother is that she had a bit more of a sense of humour. I mean, my dad had a sense of humour, but my mother seemed to have a bit more of a childish, I guess, sense of humour, and that kind of connected with us a bit more than my father. I mean, obviously, I laughed with my father about all sorts of things, and my father is funny at times. There's no doubt about that. He's not a complete. Bag of rocks or whatever, but it's just, I don't know. It just seemed to be very kind of. I don't know what. I don't know. He just seemed disinterested a lot of the time. It's like we very rarely ever really. As kids, like, we very rarely ever went anywhere really. When we were babies, we did, but after a certain age, like, it just seemed like he just wasn't really that interested. We barely ever did anything. We barely left the house, really. I think and that's why I used to go, during the 90s and noughties, well, probably more the noughties than anything else, early noughties, or early to mid noughties. Like, I used to spend more like, when my mum used to go to, like, sometimes she'd go to, like, there was like an area not that far away. If it was like probably, like, I don't know, maybe like a mile away, maybe maybe half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away from where we used to live, just to kind of get out of the house, I think, rather than going to the local shops. And obviously that area also had some, they had like charity shops at that time, and it was a different time, and it was more interesting back then than it is today. They had like a little cabin there, and it was more friendly. There was a friendlier vibe back then to that area, and it's probably because there was a lot more antisocial behaviour than there is today. But my point is that she liked to get out of the house, and in hindsight, I can see why now. She just felt. I think my dad and mum were basically stuck together in a boring marriage that wasn't fulfilling them anymore, and obviously they got lumbered with kids again. So that's their own fault, I mean, maybe that's not exactly fair to say, because I'm sure at least one of the 4 children was probably an accident. I don't think all of them were planned. But regardless, I think that they felt in the end that they just kind of. I think really that their marriage was over probably about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, really, and they've just kept kind of I don't know. I don't really know. Just, just didn't. I just didn't really feel like they really had anything going on between them, really. And so my mum used to kind of just like to get out of the house, and so she'd ask me or one of my brothers sometimes if we'd like to go out and go somewhere with her, and so that's what we used to do. And there was no real reason for us to go like to the shops a half a mile away, three quarters of a mile away from us, really. But it was just something to do. It was just a chance to get away, to break away from just the kind of same tedious repetitiveness of just the same thing of everyday life. It was the closest thing I or my brother often got to going anywhere, really, honestly. And as depressingly, as shallow as it is to say something like that, it's like going to the shops was like a little breakaway. It was like a little holiday almost. I don't know I don't know what happened, but just in the end, I just think that basically it just. I don't know, really. I don't know what happens. I think they just ended up kind of regretting having kids, and I think they got kind of stuck in this situation now where they're both broke because they aren't working and they've got kids to take care of now, and I think that all just kind of spiraled out of control, and then that's I'm guessing probably that's kind of where the alcohol stuff came in, and I shouldn't be saying all this. I accept, it's like this is personal stuff, but. Yes, this is my channel, and I'll say whatever the hell I want, really. And if other people don't like it, including the people that this video concerns, then tough luck, really. But yeah, I just never really felt like I had much of really much of a connection with my parents, especially my father. I mean, maybe up to a certain point when I was a child, I think there was a point, I think, sort of around my middle childhood period where I remember watching I used to sit in between my dad's knees. We used to watch Pokemon on the telly and Bernard's watch and things like this during the 90s and noughties. And so I'm not saying like my father was never there. I'm just saying that just like overall it just seemed very distant. And I don't know why that. I don't know what caused that, but it just never really seemed like he was ever really truly present a lot of the time. Like to me, he always seemed like he'd rather be elsewhere doing something else. And I think I know what it is now. I think I figured it out. I think deep down he didn't ever really want to get in. I don't think he ever wanted to marry my mother. That's what I think it is. I think he always felt that he in the end, he actually loved another woman that he'd met before my mother. But in the end, he couldn't get out of it because obviously they had kids. So he felt. And that's if nothing else, I can at least respect my father for that, for sticking around and not just pissing off out the door one day and just never coming back. I mean, it probably would have been better for us in the end, but at the very least, I can say that about my dad. Stuck around for us. At least we did have a house. We had food over our heads. We always had things at Christmas, and I'm not saying that it was like some. I'm not saying it was like some. Monster or anything. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that I just never understood him. I never understood my father. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't really even. I never really got to see it. I never really got to have any real deep conversations with him about anything. He never really seemed that engaged in anything apart from his own interests. It was always about what he wanted and what he liked to do and what he wanted to watch, and whether it was cricket on the TV or snooker or whatever it was. It was always more about what he liked and what he wanted rather than. It's like I honestly can't remember more than say maybe 2 or 3 times as ever going to the local park. I know we went to the park when we were young, when we were really young, but we very rarely ever really did anything. We certainly didn't go to the coast very often. Not as far as I can remember. I think basically a handful of times. Again, yes, when we were babies, when we were very young, we went away more often. But I don't know, towards the later part of the 90s, my family kind of just seemed to just. I don't know, I don't know. It just became this, just kind of, I don't even know what to call it really. I mean, we just didn't do anything. We didn't do anything as a family. We didn't, and like I said before, like, Christmas is, my mother would sometimes like playing board games and stuff like that. And like my dad never seemed that interested. Like we used to play card games and like when you still used to have those like board games where you had to I can't remember the name of it now. It was like a thing like a plastic like dome like thing, and it had like dice in it, and you'd like press on it and you had to work your way around the board, I think. My mum used to play card games and stuff with us, and I honestly can't remember like right now anyway, like I can't really remember my dad ever really seemed to be, he never seemed interested. It was just more about the TV, it was more about listening to the radio, and I don't know, maybe he just felt that his role in that dynamic wasn't I think really in the end, I think my father felt he sort of like subconsciously was like sort of like carrying on that kind of like a very kind of like reserved, conservative sort of that overly kind of a bit type of toxic masculinity stuff that was kind of like carried over from, I don't know, like the 40s and 50s or something. Maybe it's because of his father's influence, and I don't really know, but yeah, my father's a bit of an oddball, really. I don't mean to sound disrespectful or horrible, but it's definitely a bit of a strange character. And my mother is as well in many ways. She's got a very, I don't know, a bit of a kind of almost bipolar-like element to her personality, I suppose. And and I say this stuff as someone that's got their own mental health problems. I'm not just sitting here just slagging everybody else off and not saying I've got my own problems. Of course I have. And at the end of the day, they are my family. If I think I've got a right to be open and honest about my own family, if nothing else. Of course I love my father and my mother. I always will, until the day they die. I'll always love them. They'll always be part of me. I'll always care about them. But it just bothers me sometimes that we couldn't have a healthy relationship. And it's not just me. It's my brothers as well, my sister. And I think because of that damaged their like potential of like their, like that's why they ended up with no friendships, and like it just in the end everything just kind of, I think, imploded. Because at one time they used to have friends. They used to hang out with my mother's sister, my aunt. They used to have friends at one time, and then just like gradually over time, I don't know what happened really, but they just dropped off like flies. Just like. That friendship ended, then another one ended, and it just kind of just all stopped. Even when we used to go out on the weekends, like me and my brothers. I think, well, mostly I think it was me and my older brother Kevin, because we're obviously older. We used to go into town with my dad. My dad used to go to like the hotel and used to. When you could still do that, I don't doubt you can do it now. We used to spend a few hours in the hotel little pool area or something, whatever it was, snooker area, whatever it was, that little back room, and we used to, and it was fun actually. That was good in some ways. I enjoyed that, because it was a chance to get out as a, because going into town at that time, it was don't forget, it was a different era back then, and it was like a little mini, it was just that thing of getting away again, that escapism from the. Being on a state, and it was nice to break away from it. But I suppose really, if anything, I think I saw my father more animated and more energetic and more interesting probably when he was with his friends or when he was out, really. I think if anything, I think my father was more interesting of a person when he drank, really. Because I think he seemed to come alive more. I think that's partly why he did drink, because he felt more confident. He felt more able to be assertive, more able to open up, I think. Whereas I think in his sober state, I think he just kind of felt very reserved. And I think that's partly because of my grandmother, really. She was a very kind of staunchly reserved individual, very conservative type, kind of a woman of her era, really, I suppose, in many respects. And I mean that with the greatest of respect. She was a woman of her time, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, that was her era. And so that obviously would have had a major impact on my dad's upbringing and how he was molded, and how he. So and because my uncle Stephen, he was kind of like that as well, very reserved, very quiet. It's like he never quite knew how to approach that kind of dynamic with them. He never really quite knew what to say, what not to say. You don't want to put your foot in it. You don't want to kind of get them in a bad mood or anything, because they can shut down easily. It's like, there were just certain things that were always off. You just could never really talk about with them. And weirdly enough, even things that they were interested in as well, like with my uncle especially, he was like that. He never really could have much of a conversation apart from the kind of basic, usual kind of just small talk and whatever. But like with my, at least like the one thing I can say about my father is that if you could every now and again engage with him with something that he liked, you could talk to for hours about it. But it didn't happen all the time. Whereas I think, so like with my father, it was more often about like sport and trains really. Whereas with my mother, it was more about things like really a lot of for her was more about, well, actually with my father as well, it's a bit more about the childhood stuff when he grew up, with my mother, just generally sort of talking about the 60s, 70s, 80s really. But it really was a lot of it was down to like the right context. You couldn't just they were very difficult to break, very difficult to crack, I would say. Extremely defensive, extremely kind of unapproachable in many ways, kind of distant, cold, emotionally unavailable parents, unless they'd had a drink, and then you could kind of get a bit of a different side of them. I think maybe as well they were kind of, I don't know. I think my father and my mum, they were trapped in this like world of they didn't really know who they were. They were, on the one hand, they were brought up in a time where you was told to suppress your emotions and the ways you really think, and that very kind of like 40s, 50s kind of like excessively conservative, reserved nature. And then on the other hand, my parents, having grown up in the 60s and 70s, this very liberating period of time with music and culture and fashion and wacky hairstyles and all that kind of crazy stuff. So I think they sometimes maybe didn't quite know who they really were as people. They kind of were stuck in this world of like not quite knowing which one they should be. On the one hand, they wanted to be kind of private and keep their personal stuff to themselves, and don't shed any emotions in front of your kids, and don't, unless they've had a drink, of course, and obviously then it all comes out. And that's often what did happen. And that's probably part of why they did drink, because I think they couldn't handle their lives. They weren't dealing with it in healthy ways because they weren't going out, they weren't socialising for the most part. Their partying days were long gone. Now they're lumbered with kids that they probably didn't want, although they'll never admit it, but probably to some extent it's true. At least one of us was an accident, I'm sure. But whatever, it's not. But it's I can sympathise with that to a certain extent. It's like, it's not like I don't get it. It's like we're all going for our own shit. But it's the fact that they dealt with it and the fact that they had kids as well, and they decided to deal with it in unhealthy ways. But having said that, I grew up in a different time. The 90s and noughties are very different compared to today. They're not the same. It's a very different era now. Everything's out in the open these days on social media. How many times do you come across social media and you come across someone talk about mental health or drug addictions or trauma or whatever. It's like now everything's out in the open, but even really back then, 25, 30 years ago, it was kind of still a bit of a stigma thing, really. A lot, and people tended to be, people really did keep stuff behind closed doors, back then. It was more, I think in many ways, the culture of that time was still kind of clinging on to that very sort of 70s, 80s vibe thing of like, sort of liberation, but also like keeping private stuff private, very personal stuff to yourself or to very few people. And so I think really my parents really were a generation of alcohol abusers and drug abusers, not addicts necessarily, but like just, I think that's how that generation dealt with a lot of stuff. They dealt with like my grandparents' generation, they dealt with stuff through doing stuff a lot of the time. Especially men, they often spent their lives like making shit and fixing stuff. And my granddad had his own shed and he used to build stuff and like fix stuff and whatever, I don't know. I think men, like, that's the thing, so many men have lost that thing of like being able to be independent and like, like do DIY and all that kind of stuff. It's like, and again, that's one good thing I can say about my father. Like, you could paint, you could decorate, you could put the wallpaper on, you could put stuff up, and that's great. And that's one thing I liked about my father is that, it's like he didn't always just rely on other people to get people in to do things. Like he could do certain things himself. But I think over the years, I think just sort of a certain apathy set in. And I think my parents just kind of gave in the end. I think they just couldn't get themselves out of it. They just struggled to deal with it all. And don't forget, if you've got screaming kids to deal with all the time, and you're already in a kind of extremely deprived area anyway, and then you've got kids that are going through shit at school, bullying, or getting expelled or getting put on report. And I understand, but me and my brothers, we caused my parents a lot of problems. I accept that, although we didn't mean to. We were just kids, and we didn't understand what was going on. We didn't understand why we were being bullied, and it's because we were neurodivergent. And I think deep down, my parents are. But there weren't. As far as I'm aware, there weren't words for things like that back then. It's like people talked about like autism and ADHD, but really, I don't think that stuff really came popular or was like sort of mainstream sort of news or something that was talked about really until I'd say about a decade ago. So there was all that stigma and taboo of like mental health issues and alcoholism and smoking. And I don't forget, really, my parents really were the TV generation, really. Although I suppose in some ways I sort of belong to that generation. Although I would say more, obviously, the impact of the internet was more of a part of my upbringing than my parents. Although obviously the use of computers was there during their youth, but not the internet. Don't forget, the internet I don't think came didn't become a thing until 91? I think it was, or 93. But even then, it wasn't even really that popular until I'd say the early to mid 2000s, and certainly social media didn't take off until I would say somewhere around about 09, 10 time. But it didn't become it. My parents grew up in the generation of the radio and the TV. I grew up in that transition period, just like my siblings. We grew up in a different era, and so there was always that thing as well between my siblings and my parents of that disconnect of we didn't understand them, they didn't understand us, and so there was always that kind of like. And don't forget as well, in a household where you've got four males, you're always going to have that thing of like that competition of dominance type thing. There's always going to be that like hierarchy of like who's the alpha male in this situation, because that's what men are like. That's what males are like. Especially when they get into teenager, that's guaranteed. That's going to happen at some point. So at some point, there's going to be that fight, that dominance over, territory and attention, and obviously having kind of fairly large family, I suppose. There were always going to be like trade-offs, and there were always going to be difficulties. It was never going to be some like fairyland like situation. Let's face it. But as I said, I just find it just kind of sad, really, that they didn't feel that they could go and get help. That they just let their life slide into such a state of helplessness and apathy that I don't think they realised just how much of an impact those choices had on us. And I don't mean that as in like, oh, well, I'm blaming everything on my present on my parents. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, like, you don't realise the impact that other people have on your development or your lack of it. And I think that's why a lot of people my own age have done so much better than me, people I knew from school, because they had a better progression of development, a quicker progression of development, because I think their parents were more supportive. They were more like role models to them. The best my parents wanted out of me was just to go and get a job. University, forget that. College, forget that. Moving to another country, what? We don't do things like that. We come from a working class area. We don't do things like that around here. So there was no sense of aspiration. There was no sense of... It's not just in my parents. I don't just blame my parents. I blame the general area, really. It's such an area that's so badly run down with economic issues and, at the time, antisocial behaviour and just kind of rebellious kids. And it was just such a... the thing is, you don't know any better, though. Unless you've lived something else, you don't have any frame of reference to it. So you grow up thinking that's normality. You think that's... And it is normality for you. But you forget that other people in the same city or certainly different parts of the country are living much better qualities of life than you are. They're going to better schools. They have better parents. They have more opportunities because there's more money. There's more things to do in that area. There's less trouble because the police have got more funding. Or there's less need for the police because people are better behaved, because there's more respect. People have got more self-respect in those areas because there's more affluent. So all of these things play into it. So I like I said, I'm not trying to put all the blame on my parents for everything that was kind of shit about my childhood or my teenage years or whatever. But I definitely think that they had a major impact on me and my family, that's for sure. Well, there's no doubt about that. They definitely had some very negative... not intentional, I wouldn't say intentional, but indirect. There were indirect consequences of their actions, their lack of... They just didn't seem to care anymore. That was my general feeling. Certainly by the time I was like 15, 16, I remember coming home sometimes from school or college, and you just see them sitting there, with a drink on the little table or whatever, and I just felt sad for them. I almost kind of had pity for them, really. I just felt really sad for them. Like, how did you end up like this? What happened to you? How did you end up here? How did you get like this? And and it was just so weird. Like, you go in sometimes, and it was just like that really awkward like silence, and nobody was talking to each other, and it was fucking sad, man. It was really fucking sad. It's sad to talk about it, It's really fucking depressing, but I just couldn't help them. There was nothing I could do for them. I tried, trust me, I tried having the conversations with them. I tried to get them to fucking wake up and smell the coffee, but they just weren't interested. They didn't want to know. It's like I used to help them with like job searches and stuff at the time when, the government was cracking down on welfare, austerity measures, and all this bullshit. And I knew in the back of my mind that I wasn't helping. Nothing I was going to say, nothing I was going to do was going to get them to change, or And in the end, I think that's partly why I left the country, because I just felt, what can I do? What can I do for these people? As much as I care about them and I love them, and I do. But sometimes you just have to say to yourself, you just have to wipe your hand with people. It's like, how much effort can you put in? How much time? It's like, I didn't have to give my time up. But I did it because I wanted to help them, because I felt a sense of loyalty to them. I felt a sense of duty because they were my parents. But you know what? In hindsight, I wish I hadn't bothered. Wasted precious time on the. I mean, maybe I don't necessarily regret it, but I could have certainly be doing things, spending time on more important things, probably, I suppose. So in the end, I had a really difficult time trying to have a relationship with my parents, because there were so many elephants in the room. There was just so much awkwardness. I've always felt that when I talk to especially when I talk to my father. There's always this really weird dynamic between us. Like there's always, we know the past, we know the elephants in the room. We always try and be civilized and laugh and talk about things, but there's always that stuff in the back of mind, and it's like, it just makes things really difficult. It makes having a really healthy, meaningful relationship with my parents really extremely difficult. Because I want to like my parents. Of course I do. I want to talk to them. I want to spend time with them. And it's not so bad if you just do it in short bursts, but when you have to live with that all the time, it rubs off on you, and it makes you start becoming like them. It's like crabs in a bucket. It's like this thing of, misery loves company kind of thing. It's like, and as much, you can give people as much empathy as you want, but in the end, you have to say to yourself, look, I'm sorry, I care about you and everything, but I've got to prioritize my own mental health here. I've got to prioritize my own well-being. Because if I'm not good to myself, then I'm certainly not going to be any good to anybody else, am I? And as well, the brutal truth is that I don't have to tolerate. It's one thing when you're a kid, you're stuck in that situation, but as an adult, you don't have to tolerate. So you have the option of leaving. You have the option to break away and do what you want to do, and say, no, I have to love you from a distance. I have to think about you from an arm's length I have to take an arm's length approach to this. It's I wish things hadn't panned out the way that they have between us and my siblings over the years, but they have. I'm not going to sit here and say that I have a great, perfect relationship with my brothers or my sister, because I don't. But at the end of the day, at least I tried. At least I gave it a shot. I've always tried to maintain a relationship with my brothers and my sister and my parents in some way. But I think just in the end, sometimes you just need to live your own life. You need that separation, whether it's physical, psychological, emotional separation from people in the end, because they're just not doing you any good. It's like, and they might not necessarily mean you any harm. They don't mean to depress you or whatever. But if you've got your own shit going on anyway, the last thing you want to be doing is because especially as a family, because it becomes this toxic thing of toxic loyalty, and I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it? It's really difficult because you want to be there for your family, but I think in the end, you just have to walk away. You just have to say, look, I can't do this. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I just can't. Don't know. I just can't. I've tried. I really have tried, but I just, you've got to, if you want to change. If you want to turn your lives around and do something and make an effort, then I'll be here for you. But until that point, I can't. There's nothing I can do for you. I'm not going to waste my life away hoping that you're going to make a change, hoping that you're going to become healthier. My life matters to me just as much as yours does to you. Although it would appear that my life matters more to me than yours does, actually, in some ways, because I've at least in some ways made some small changes to my life. Yeah, I've not made enough changes, I admit, but it's a gradual process of learning and suffering and getting to the rock bottom of yourself, isn't it? You have to reach that point, and I think in some ways maybe sometimes my parents didn't quite reach that point. Although it certainly seemed like they did at times, but yet they just never seemed to want to do anything. I don't know. It's just, I really wanted to. I really did want to have a good relationship with my parents, but people are complicated, and let's face it, sibling-parent relationships are extremely difficult, I think, at the best of times, because we're talking about very different people, very different generations, with different expectations and attitudes and beliefs and biases, and their own insecurities that often get played out for their kids, and all sorts of unspoken bitterness and resentment and jealousy of their own children, and that certainly was apparent in my family, even with my own siblings. I think at times, although they would never admit that, but yeah, I don't know. I just find a lot of it really difficult to talk about. I find a lot of it really difficult to think about, and I don't think about it all the time, but when I do, I find myself sighing a lot and just kind of getting sad and getting a bit kind of frustrated about the whole thing. So, at the end of the day, it's not that I didn't try to. Yeah, I think I really did try to make them proud of me. I really did try to make them. But it shouldn't be on me, should it? It shouldn't be. Why is that my responsibility to make them happy, to make them proud, to make them feel something about me as their son? It's like, why is that my duty? And the fact that my dad kind of seemed a bit bitter about me coming back over here or leave, and it's because at the end of the day, he takes no accountability for his life. And in many ways, my mother's the same, and probably to some extent my siblings as well. And I say that as someone that's also had bouts of the same thing, where I didn't take any accountability. I blamed everybody else. I made all the excuses in the book. And trust me, I've been there. I've probably made more excuses at times than they have for not doing something. But I always at some point reached a stage where I turned something around, where I actually did something. Even if it took me years, I always eventually did something. And that's the difference between me and them. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, I'm superior. I just mean that I had the resilience to get up and do something, to at least try. Whereas I think in many, I get the impression with them that they just kind of gave up. They just let themselves sink into apathy and they just didn't seem to care. They just fell into despair and they couldn't get out of it. And on top of that, obviously, all the difficulties of the economic situation as well, that kind of kept them sort of stuck in this kind of sort of economic sinkhole. And they didn't find anything, I don't think, in the end, that pulled them out of it. I think I did to some extent, although I've certainly had my own battles over the years, as you can imagine, having gone through a lot of the stuff that I've talked about on my channel. I've obviously, like everybody else, gone through some very difficult, dark periods, mentally speaking, emotionally speaking, like everybody else. So I don't sit here feeling sorry for myself. I'm just saying that, I just like having the opportunity to express it in a place that's appropriate, that's maybe can help somebody. I certainly can help myself. Family. They say that blood is thicker than water, and that's true. And family does matter. And you should try and build a relationship with your family if you can. If you don't, or if you don't have one, or it's at the moment, or it's kind of struggling, or it's kind of fallen by the wayside a bit, you should try and always have a bit of a relationship with your family if you can, because you're only going to get one father, one mother, a brother, a sister. You're only going to get so many years with them. You're only going to get so many opportunities to express yourselves and to be honest and open about how you really feel, and to try and make amends, to try and make up for lost time, to try and make up for the issues of the past. Although the past is what it is. But sometimes people are carrying around a lot more things with them than you truly realise. And I'm sure my parents, I don't doubt that they have their own set differences in guilt and regrets, and I'm sure that they feel bad about certain things in the past, and they've obviously made mistakes, and I can forgive them to a certain extent. But at the same time, I never really. I've never heard my parents apologise. Never. Not once. For anything they ever did. Never. And I think it's probably because they didn't think that they did anything wrong. So either they are sociopaths, or they just, I don't know, they just have some sort of developmental barriers of some sorts, and they just didn't think that what they did was, I don't know, maybe they just think that you should just get over it, that was them. It's like, and well, that's all right for you, because you those things haven't impacted you. They've impacted other people, and you should have the fucking courage to own up to it, and have the fucking balls to say, "I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry for what I did." But you'll never get that out of them. I'll never get that out of them. They'll go to the grave with certain things that I'll never know about. I'm sure of it. As will I. But at the end of the day, people are complex, aren't they? Families are incredibly difficult to understand. And it's often until years or decades later. It's not until years or decades later that you reach a point where you start to understand a bit more about things, and when you've had time to reflect, when you've had a bit of time to heal and to kind of distance yourself from certain things, and where you can have more of a better understanding on it, because you've got more clarity, you've got more vision, you've got a wider perspective on life, because you've lived a bit now, you've got a bit of life experience behind you. And that's partly why I decided to come to Time, because I felt like I wasn't really living life anymore. I just felt like I was stuck and just fell into a trap for quite a while, and I needed to get out of it, and I wanted to go and live my life as a 20-something. I wanted to have new opportunities, I wanted to travel a bit, I wanted to have a bit of sense of independence and freedom. But there comes a point when you hit your late 20s, I think, and certainly by the time I say about 34, 35-ish, where you start to really reflect on the past and who you are, why you are the way you are, where you've been, what you've done. Not necessarily in a midlife crisis per se, but certainly a kind of existential period of self-doubt and curiosity and, sort of guessing, self-guess, kind of just a kind of lot of uncertainty about things. The bottom line of it is that I just didn't have, I don't think I ever really truly had a really, I don't think I really had an open, honest, truly honest connection with my parents. And it's like, I understand that, it's like there are certain things that parents, I guess, will never be able to be for you that you want them to be, and vice versa. So, I suppose you can't have, extreme unrealistic expectations on people, but I do think that all I'm saying is that I just wish that things had panned out differently, that's all. I really do. I wish things hadn't spiraled into all of that 20-year-long, dysfunctionality and toxic coping mechanisms and habits, and because I think it would have had a much better positive impact on me. It would have. Yeah, they could have just. It's not. I think more than anything else, I see now that they could have had so much more potential as people, as they now head towards their retirement, their elderly years, and the last decades of their life, basically. That I see so much waste, I see so much potential thrown out the window for quick fixes, and because they felt that nobody cared about them anymore, that nobody was there for them, and that apparently kids weren't enough for them in the end. They always needed something else, and I don't know, this world can get very dark, man. It can get really fucking dark at times, and really, really depressingly, yeah. And I know you shouldn't ruminate and catastrophize over certain things, and sort of get bogged down with the ills of the past, of other people that were part of your past. But you just ponder these things sometimes. You sit there and you reflect and you reminisce and you think, I wonder why certain things happened the way they did. I just wish things. The thing is, it's like it could have been so much. They had ample opportunities to turn themselves around, to do things, and they just wasted it. And again, no, it's not. It's not on me. It's not. I don't have to live with that guilt. I don't have to live with the choices that they made, but I have to live with the impacts of those choices, the direct and indirect consequences of those things, because they shaped the way that I became. They shaped my identity in many ways. They shaped my coping mechanisms. They shaped my subconscious mind in many ways, indirectly, subconsciously. My habits, the things that I ended up liking, for good and bad. It's that they had a massive impact on me and my siblings and I would have to say, for being honest about it, more negative ways than positive ones. Two people that went stupid. They could very well have had decent jobs or even careers, they just threw it out the window. You know, they threw their lives away for the bottle. They threw it away because they didn't have any motivation. Apparently, they didn't seem to have any ambitions, any dreams, any hopes. And you know, I want to accept that part of it is because they are products of their time, having become adults in the 80s and the problems that were going on in the UK, and especially in the northeastern parts of the country at that time. I accept that there were difficulties of that period. I accept that it's not like today, and it's a different time, and people have different attitudes and beliefs and things. But the thing is, it's like my parents still have plenty of job opportunities to have jobs, to work, to do things, to save money. And certainly we could have gone to better schools, you know. And it's not because the lists were all full. It's just that they just didn't care enough. That's the truth of it. They didn't seem to care enough about us. I don't think. I think they were too bogged down in their own misery, their own self-inflicted sources of misery to really. They just didn't want us to do better than them. That's what I think it is. They just didn't want that. They wanted the bare minimum. They wanted us to essentially become like them. It pains me to say that, but that is the truth of it. Because anything better would have amplified their insecurities and their regrets and mistakes and guilt and poor life choices and their lifestyle choices. But that's on them. You know, they made their own decisions at the end of the day. You know, we just had to live with the consequences of them, psychologically speaking, in terms of our mental health projections. So I don't blame them 100% for who I am and everything, but they certainly had a massive, massive impact on me. There's no denying that. It's just the harsh reality of it. Just such a shame, really. Such a shame. You know, at the end of the day, look, I can sleep well at night because I know that I did my bit. I know that I tried. You know, I tried to open up with them. I tried. Yeah, I tried. I really did try. And this is not some thing of me trying to justify not having any relationship with them or anything like that. It's not that. I'm just saying that sometimes I find it difficult to have a relationship with them. I find it difficult to talk to them. I find it difficult to be who I am now as a person, given that they're still in many ways the same people that they used to be. That's what I find difficult, that dynamic, where they still think of me as a version of myself that I'm not anymore. And they're still essentially kind of stuck in their ways. They haven't changed, they haven't moved on, they haven't progressed really. They haven't evolved in any real meaningful ways. Yeah, they've gotten older, I'm sure they've learned some things, but I don't know, it's just that kind of rate of change, I think, in many ways. And I think there's an element of bitterness there about them because, you know, they see themselves in their heads at my age and think, you know, that should have been me. It should have been me living over there. Should have been me. I should have done that. But they had opportunities to do things. Again, you know, they had time. They had chances, but they blew them. My father could have gone on the railways. He had chances to do it. My mother could have worked in healthcare or cleaning or whatever. Social care, you know, whatever, hospitality. She could have done all sorts of things, but she wasn't interested. She didn't want to know. You know, they just both wanted to sit on their asses for 30 years and do nothing, and then complain about it all decades later. I'm sorry, but that's life. You know, you face the consequences of your own choices at the end of the day. I'm not blaming you for everything. I'm not saying there weren't things out of your control, and I'm not saying there weren't issues at the time, but in terms of the economy and money and everything. Of course there were. There always has been. There always will be, especially in areas that are already plagued with various different degrees of deprivation. You're always going to have that. But at the end of the day, at some point, surely, someone has to be assertive and someone has to grow a spine and say, we've got kids, I want my kids to do better. I want my kids to have a better quality of life than me, and I'm going to get up and aim for that. But the fact that they didn't tells me that they just, I don't think they ever really wanted to have kids. I think they wanted to have maybe one son and a daughter, and that was it. But they got lumbered with 4 kids. But again, that's part of their own fault, because they should have been more careful then. It's all good and well looking back now in your 60s and with regrets and guilt or whatever. But it's like, I'm sorry, but you've had 40 years to sort yourselves out. You could have done some things for yourself, if not for us, for yourself, but you didn't. That's why I don't really have any. That's why I don't really want to listen to them complain anymore. That's why I don't want to hear their whinging and complaining. It's like you brought your life. You brought this on yourself. This is your doing. Do you not realise that this is of your own doing? In many, many ways. I'm not saying you had it easy. I'm not saying there weren't challenges. I'm not saying that it was as straight as as simple as doing this and everything would be okay. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you didn't you didn't seem to want to try. That's what bothers me. Is you didn't seem to want to try anything. And if it was down to mental health stuff, then you should have gone to therapy then. You should have gone to a therapist. But they didn't do that either. So again, you end up in a place with people like that where you just say, look, I'm sorry, but I'm done. I wipe my hands with you. There's nothing I can do for you. It's on you. If you want to change, good luck. Whatever. I'll be here if you do ever fucking want to change. But until that point, basically, I think you should just stay away from me. Really, I don't want your negativity rubbing off on me. I've had enough of it. I had enough of it as a kid, as a teenager, and even as a young adult when I had to move back in with them, which was a mistake in my 20s. Twice actually. So I've always had, as you can tell, I've always had a very difficult relationship, tumultuous, what the word is, however you say it. Can't bloody speak properly today. I've always had a chaotic, if you like, difficult, awkward, weird relationship with my parents. That is the bottom line of it all. And I probably will do for the rest of my life. Maybe as they get older, if they survive another 20, 30 years, I doubt it, but if they do, maybe they'll, might be more likely to kind of, admit some things, and maybe we can have some real discussions and talk some shit over maybe at some point, some heart to hearts. But, until then, as far as I'm concerned, I just want to live my life now. I just want to kind of, I need to have my own space, and I need to, sometimes I just kind of would prefer it I just don't really want to get involved, to be honest. I'm sorry to say, it's like what they're, it's like they always come to you about saying complaints here and there and what this is going on. It's like, well, what do you expect? What the fuck do you expect me to do about it? About the next door neighbour complaining about this, that, and the other. It's like, so, well, what do you expect me to do? I'm your son, all right, on the other side of the planet. I don't have any authority to deal with issues related to council matters or to do with the police or anything. So that's got nothing to do with me. Don't drag me into your bullshit, all right? I tried multiple times to try and help with certain things, but you weren't interested, didn't want to know. So don't come rushing at me with all that crap. All right, because I don't want to know about it anymore. I did more than enough for you. in my 20s. Did more than enough. More than I ever should have done. More than anybody else in the family. Don't unload your fucking bullshit on me. If it's that fucking bad, go and see a bloody mental health therapist or something. Get off your fucking ass, go for a walk, go for a jog, change your fucking diet. While you still can. Because you're going to be an old man soon, you're going to be an old woman soon. Stop laying all your negativity on me all the time. I've got enough of my own. I love you, but you fucking get on my nerves. I can only take so much of you before I say, I'm sorry, but you've got to fucking just leave me alone. Just fucking leave me the fuck alone. I don't want to hear from you. You don't even really exist sometimes in my head, to be honest with you. I'm sorry to say that, but I just don't want anything to do with you for the time being. Until you make a change, until you turn some shit around. Or unless someone fucking dies or something, then I've got no choice to fucking engage or whatever. It's like, I know that sounds horrible. I know that sounds fucking horrible. But that's what people like that do to you. They make you fucking hate them in the end. They make you hostile and horrible and cold towards them. Because that's what you were to me for fucking 20 odd years. Who's the fucking adult here? Is it you or is it me? Because it feels like I've been doing more of the adulting for the past 15 years than they've done in their entire 60 odd years. See, this is what happens to you. See, this is how you end up when you grow up in a dysfunctional, toxic home. This is what you become like. This you end up like this, talking to a fucking iPad, hoping that somewhere along the line, somebody might hear you, somebody might comment and like your video. In this vastness of millions of people craving attention, which, let's face it, is exactly kind of what we're all doing here, aren't we? Anyway, look, I've said enough. I don't know what else to say about this. All I seem to do is just end up in losing my temper and going off in a rant towards the end of my videos. Seems to have become a bit of a habit, but yeah, sometimes self-awareness is just kind of your worst enemy in the end. It's just not always healthy for you to have so much, and it's not always healthy for you to be a deep thinking, to be introspective, and sometimes it's not even beneficial to reflect and reminisce. That's why sometimes I think the less pictures and videos and things that, so that's why I kind of hate Facebook sometimes, remind you of things. It's like, that's like fucking 10 years ago. It's like, why are you reminding me of that? It's like I don't, like, do you think I don't know about it? Do you think I've forgotten? Do you think it's like, why are we talking about this thing? It's like, that was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's like, let's move on, shall we? Let's live in the present. Let's work towards something different now, something new. We've been there, we've done that. So some parents, sometimes you talk to them and they talk about the same things over and over and fucking over again. So it's like, we've talked about this shit a million times over. We've had the same boring conversations, the same jokes, the same sarcasm, the same bullshit. It's like, why are we talking about this shit? Because they're stuck in the past, that's what it is. They're stuck in the past because they haven't moved forwards. They haven't lived for the past couple of decades, so their brains are still stuck in the 1970s, 1980s, because they haven't lived anything beyond that. They haven't had any new experiences over the years. They got stuck, became apathetic, and got wrapped up in their own self-pity and misery, and they couldn't get themselves out of it. Or they didn't think that, or they didn't have the courage to try and get help, to get support, to admit that they needed help, and so they got stuck for decades. That's on them though. That's I hate sounding like this whiny little bitch. I'm sorry. I don't try to like come across like this. But it's just, yeah. Sometimes I kind of just. I'm glad that I don't speak to my parents very often. I'm glad that I don't see them very often, because sometimes they just get on your nerves. And I'm sure I don't doubt that I get on their nerves as well. Sometimes, no matter what you do in the end, sometimes things are just no good for you, Doesn't matter how much you feel or think about something, sometimes you just have to say, look, my well-being, my mental health, my happiness, or whatever word you want to use, I'm sorry to say, but it's more important than those people. What matters more to me, because I want to feel something good about myself. I want to feel good in myself and not be bogged down with the world all the time, 24 hours a day. Because that's, I've got enough of my own baggage to last me the next 30, 40 years. So it's like, why would I want to be carrying around or talking about or being involved in things that make me feel even worse than I already do? But anyway, that's just me, but each to their own, I guess. But yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult, and it's when you've had a very difficult, turbulent relationship with not just with my parents, with my brothers in many ways, or especially my older brother at times, and my younger brother in other ways. Even my sister, I don't think we've always necessarily got eye to eye, I suppose. But yeah, so I've always had a very difficult, kind of a bit of a disastrous relationship with my family, in all sorts of different ways. But at least I can say that I was loyal. I tried. I didn't completely just stop talking to them. I had breaks. I had times where I needed to just kind of be left the fuck alone for a period of time, and that continues to today, and it'll continue into the future. I'm only a human being. I have limits like everybody else. I can't give everything of myself to everyone all the time. I just can't do it. Too exhausting. If they want to put something out there, contribute, great, wonderful. But until that point, that's it. Why should I bother? Why should I bother? Why should I? Families are important. Families matter. You hear all this stuff all the time. It's like, yeah, that's great if you've got a relatively healthy family. I'm not saying that. Look, every family's got their own unique, nuanced, sort of difficult, quirky, weird shit going on. It's like every family's got that awkward parts, awkward stuff going on. That's just a reality of what families are. All sorts of weird, unspoken stuff going on. All sorts of strange dynamics and unspoken kind of deeper, darker stuff going on with regards to power and control and all that kind of crap. Everyone goes for that. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a family. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try, but I don't know. Sometimes you gotta ask yourself at the end of the day, is it worth your time? Is it worth your energy? And sometimes I just find myself saying, nah, not really, not anymore. Maybe at one time, but not anymore. It's like well, if you're just giving more of yourself than you're getting back, you just say to yourself, and again, I'm not someone that's like about everything always having to be about like materialistic things or anything like that. I just mean that, like, it's like I want something in return for something that I'm giving.
You know, I'm not giving all myself away if you're not going to. If you're not, I'm not going to be vulnerable with you unless you're going to be vulnerable with me. How about that? How about we shake on that? The moment you're willing to open up and be honest and be vulnerable and say some shit that we need to say, start having some conversations that we should have been having 20 years ago. That's the moment when I'll open up and try and have a more meaningful, closer dynamic with you. Until that point, I don't give a fuck. You do you, I'll do me. All right, let's leave it at that. Catch you soon, guys.